Hello and welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrew Townsend. I'm marketing operations here at Smarty. Today's webinar is about setting up your web forms in a snap with address autocomplete. We're very excited to get started and dive into this topic. Our presenter today is Andrew Johnson, one of our brilliant software engineers. We're excited to have him here with us and excited to hear what you've got to share, Andrew. So without further ado, I'll turn the time over to you.
Righty. Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to be going over our address autocomplete SDK. Today I want to share with you just a simple website that I wrote to demonstrate how simple it is to implement our SDKs in your websites. So let's dive right into this. To start off, I have our website right here where we are going to be talking about our Autocomplete Pro APIs, starting off with our US products. So just to give you an overview, this is just a simple website that in the background is using our SDK. So let's look at some code here. So starting off, we can see here that I am importing the Smarty Streets JavaScript SDK. Again, what I'm going to show you today is how simple it is to call that SDK and to use the features that it has. And then we're going to kind of dive into how we can best improve our results that we get to better accomplish what our users want. Again, like I said, we're importing our SDK here, and then we both have our US product and our international product. So we're going to show both of these today. So to dive in, the first thing on the setup that is really important is our credentials. In order to use our API, you have to be specifying that you are actually who you say you are. So we have our shared credentials where you are creating a key in your account and then using that key in your code here. With that, then once you have the credentials set up, now let's start going into our function here where we're going to call our US Autocomplete Pro. It's really straightforward. It's really easy. All you do is you set up the client where you're passing in your credentials, and then you have to specify your license. So here we're specifying that we're using the US Autocomplete Pro Cloud license. And then we are calling our build function to then build that client. The client is what's going to communicate with the API, and we're going to send it a lookup. This lookup takes in an address, whatever your user is entering, and it will send that to the API and then return responses based on what is in that address.
So this is essentially the very root of setting this up. These are the basics. You have to have these things for them to work.
Correct.
The other page that you had displayed, the form,
website.
This is, yes, the website. This is what is happening right behind this bare minimum.
Correct.
If autocomplete is going to work, this is what needs to be in there.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
And then, yeah, I have some commented out code here that we're going to go through, but we're going to skip that for now. And we're just going to go down here where we are sending our result to the client. And then I have just a function that's going to display those results in the website. Again, this is part of the SDK here where it's sending that lookup. And that's it. That's those setting up your credentials, setting up the client, creating a lookup with the address information, and then sending it to the API and receiving a result. That's all our SDK needs to function. We can show that here and go back to the website and enter in a simple address. So just enter in 23.
How'd you know my address?
And you'll see here that the website that I've made displays in a data list those addresses that were received from the Autocomplete Pro API. Displaying those for the users to then pick which one they want to use, select it, and then displaying how the API shows those in the different parts. So your street, your city, your state, your zip code. And we're going to get into this undefined one in the future here. So that's it. With this, you have the ability to have autocomplete.
Great. End of webinar. Thanks for coming.
So now let's get into the nitty-gritty. Now let's dive into how can we modify using the API, using the SDK to better improve our users' experience.
Better than even just having it up.
Just having it up.
Okay, so now these are ways to make sure that your customers are getting a tailored experience.
Yeah, exactly. We're gonna tailor it to their use case.
Fantastic.
So let's start again with this undefined section here. This undefined section is the source of truth. Where are you getting what information are you getting it from? So we have postal addresses and we have non-postal addresses. Postal addresses are addresses that are verified by the U.S. Postal Service that are deliverable, mailable addresses. And then non-postals are addresses that the USPS either doesn't know about or doesn't mail to. A really good example of that is like a cell tower. No one receives mail at a cell tower, but we still need to know that address exists. So the first thing that we can do in our lookup, we can specify what source we want it from. So the options with that is we can specify postal, where we just want USPS addresses, or you can specify all, where all will give you all postal and non-postals. And then what will happen with our source response there here in our form is if we type in an address now with it set, it will now tell us, is that a postal or non-postal? And this one says postal. A non-postal will come up as, let me pull up my non-postal address here.
Good to have example addresses.
Yes, always. Will appear as other, stating that it is not a postal address, it is an other address.
Okay. Meaning the address exists, but the USPS doesn't consider it a deliverable address.
That's correct.
Okay. Address. I'm sorry.
So this is really important. In your use case, do your customers need all available addresses or do they just need postal addresses? Most probably only need postal.
Right. If you're gathering a mailing address specifically for the purpose of mailing it, it's probably a good idea to set this to postal only.
Yeah, keep it at postal. And then it will only return responses that are postal addresses. They won't see any others. The next is how many lookups is your customer going to, how many results or outputs in that list will they see? So right now, the default, if this is not set, if max result is not set, is 10. So if we go back to the web page and we type in some input here, this drop down is getting 10 outputs.
10 options,
10
outputs.
options from the API. This is what's returned from the API. And now we can say, well, maybe this list, as you can see, it's kind of large. Maybe your customers are going to give you better addresses that are going to be more precise. You can reduce this list to make it smaller for them. So let's just reduce this to 5. That way, when they're using the website, you only show 5 options.
Yeah, from a marketing perspective, it's valuable. One of the benefits of autocomplete is that it's making the form fills easier, and the less options you have to like scroll through and take a look at try to find your address, the less you have to move your mouse, the faster it is to complete the form and the less drop off you'll have.
Yeah, just a better experience. So now that's how we can specify source, how we can specify how many options we show them. Now going down into it more, we can now filter what they receive. We can filter what addresses are returned by a couple different ways. So first is we're only specifying specific locations. We want addresses returned in specific areas. So that's our include only fields. There are 3 fields. We have include only cities, include only states, and include only zip codes. Now, these need to be used separately. You can use include only cities and include only states together, but if you have cities that are specified in a state, you need to make sure that you don't include that state and include only states. Well, let's say with include only cities, my example here is the cities of Provo and Orem in Utah, Redmond, Washington, and then let's just go with the state of California. So our include only here will include only these options. They won't receive any other results from other states. So we can go back to our example here. Let's type in a different address. And we'll see here we have here in Orem and Provo. Now it will filter based off of a couple other things that we're going to go more deep into. But here's a few examples of those filterings. Now
That's such a useful thing, though. Like I just hired an arborist to come and trim some of my trees. And I found him on his website. And on his website, he's like, "What's your address?" Right? Like they have to know that so they
Yeah.
know what trees. And it would be stupid for me to be able to type in an address in Texas when I'm in Utah or Idaho, right? Uh, so it's very useful to double down and be like, "Yeah, we only cover these, and we're only going to allow these addresses to be entered."
Yeah,
Very cool.
exactly. And it does it by order too. So it'll go through the Provo Orem ones addresses first, then Redmond, and then California. Now, if you step over yourself and you do Utah in your state, because there's two Utahs in both the cities and the state, it will prioritize state over cities. So you will get addresses from all over the state of Utah, not just the city that you specified. So if you're going to use both these filters, you need to make sure that if you are specifying cities in a specific state, you don't add that state in the state field. You also don't need to use this field at all too. You can just use the cities field if you don't need to filter on an entire city. So yeah, and separately, you can use the states by themselves. This is awesome if, like Andrew said, you want to only allow in specific areas. Where if you only work in the state of Utah, you don't want any addresses outside of the state of Utah to be able to say, "Oh yeah, come to me," and it's like, "Oh, I only work in Utah."
Right. There's several states in the US that kind of cross border state lines. For example, the city of Texarkana on the border of Texas and Arkansas. Maybe you only have a business license in the Texas side. So you might want to just put Texas addresses in there.
Yeah. Zip codes is a different field with it. When using only zip codes, you can't use the cities or states fields. You only can filter on zip codes. Zip codes, you can specify many zip codes in the list. It is a separate field to use if you want to be more precise on exact locations. The next is excluding. So sometimes you have customers that work in almost every state in the US. But you have like one or two that you want to exclude. And you don't want to make include only cities. You don't want to make that list have every single state in the US except for the two that you can't use. So we made this field called exclude states, where you can just specify a handful of states that you don't use, either that you're not allowed to work in or that you don't have customers in. You can exclude just those states, and then the rest of the US is available. You'll be able to get addresses from that. So here we exclude the state of California. Alrighty, now we can go into in my personal favorite fields is the prefer fields. The prefer section is really interesting, where you can specify, hey, I do want to have all available addresses, but I prefer if we get results from this area. So this first example, I prefer that I get results in Redmond, Washington. So that way, when I'm using the autocomplete, I will get those addresses first. But if the address doesn't exist in Redmond, Washington, I'll still get addresses in the rest of the US. Again, cities and states work the same as the include only section, where if you can specify both at the same time, just not the same state in both fields. Now going into a little bit more in depth with this, we also have this ratio. So you can state, I want a specific ratio of what I prefer and things that are outside of what I prefer. By default, the prefer ratio is set to 100%. So if you prefer Redmond, Washington, and the state of Utah, 100%, you are going to get addresses in these states. So if we come over here and we type in an address, you'll see that it's in Washington and Utah. If we come back over to our ratio and we're like, okay, actually, I would like my customers to be able to see some addresses outside of the state. You can go in and change it to a 50%, and we should be able to see here addresses outside of the US, or outside of the states that we specified. So we have one here from New York. So we're able to see additional addresses. It's kind of nice because you're preferring specific places where maybe most of your customers exist in the state of Washington or the state of Utah. So you're preferring their addresses over ones that they're not going to want. They don't care about New York, but it is still possible that maybe you deliver outside of those states and some customer needs something delivered somewhere else. So you want to give them those options. So the ratio is really nice. Now, then the next option, if let's say, for example, you don't have any of these sets, so we don't have preferred, set, include, exclude, nothing set right now, our API will base your address responses off of your customer's IP address. So as they use this client-side website, they're going to submit an address here, and because I'm in Utah, I'm going to get responses for the state of Utah. It's using my IP address, its location, to determine what addresses are more particular for myself. Now, this is really cool. This is a good use case for a lot of customers. A lot of customers, they want addresses that they're close to them and not addresses that are on the other side of the US. But there is a use case where you want to be able to give them addresses from anywhere in the US. So we can change that filtering on IP addresses using our preferred geolocation. So our preferred geolocation, when you set it to none, it will now give you addresses based off of the entire US, not on your location. So if we come back over, sorry.
And your means the user.
The user, sorry. Yes, the user's location. So now when I enter an address, I'm going to get addresses from across the US, as you can see here, Nebraska, Connecticut. So a more broader range. If you want to specify, again, you can set the preferred geolocation to be specific. When set to city, this will again use your customer's IP address, the person using the website sending the request in. Or you just don't have it set. And again, if it's not set, it will use your customer's IP address. Now, there are some caveats to this with filtering. So one of the biggest ones with the geolocation is that it has to be set by itself, and none of the include or exclude can be used with the geolocation. So if you use include or exclude fields, it will prioritize those over the geolocation. So if they're in Utah and you excluded Utah in the exclude, it won't use their IP address for that. So it must be used by itself.
Interesting.
Or it can be used in combination. I misspoke there. It can be used in combination, but the include and exclude take precedence. They are more important than the IP address.
A question came up with the preferred geolocation. If we call from the server side, is there any way to use the client's IP?
Yes, this is an excellent question. We do allow you to pass along your client's IP address. So up here, we're going to show this really quick because this is really nice. When creating our client builder here on the server side, you can add an additional field called with custom headers. So adding a custom header to this field, you can pass along in the header X forwarded. See if I can spell this correctly. And then with your whatever your customer's IP address, you just add it to that field, and then it will pass it along to us. So this X forwarded for will pass along their IP address to our API, and then it will see this and it will use that IP address instead of your server's IP address. You just have to grab their IP when creating the client here.
Sure. Sure.
So really straightforward, really simple. And then it will, by default, if you give us this header, it will use that IP address by default. And then if you want to specify not to use any IP address, or you want to change those options, you can filter things off and on. So you can still pass us their IP address and just set the preferred geolocation to none, and then we won't use it, but it's still there. You can still have it in your code, which is kind of nice.
I
So,
see. I see. So when I'm making these calls, and I set it up to have 10, like lookup max results, we set it to 5. Let's say I set it to 10 or 30. As soon as I start typing, as I'm trying to measure out the amount of lookups that I'm using, am I going to be using 10 lookups if I have 10 show up?
that is a good question. On the lookup side of things, it is per request.
Okay.
It's per, so when you send a request in, that is what counts as a lookup, not the results, not how many options you get back.
Okay, great.
So now that brings us into another really good question and another really good tip for our API here. You are using lookups when you call the API. And so how do you reduce the amount of lookups being used when your customer uses your website? It's really easy. It's just a simple if statement here. So all you really need to do is you just say, hey, if our address length is whatever length you want to check for. So let's say we want to make sure it's at least 3 characters long. If it's less than 4, we just return. We just don't call the API. We just wait until our customer has entered multiple characters before we give them any response.
Ah, I see.
So that way they'll probably enter their house number, their primary number before.
And those typically have 3 or 4.
3 or 4 characters. Yeah. Yes. And that way you'll get less lookups and better results for them too. 3 is a really good number. I like usually having 3 characters. That's a pretty solid start. So that's the US option. Our US product, again, is really robust. It has a lot of really awesome filtering features, and it's really straightforward to just set it up without any features. Like if you just want to get up and run, like you can, and it will work great for your customer. And just small tweaks to it can add a lot of usability.
That's excellent. What's different about this from the international side?
So international has a lot of differences. Our international products is one of those things that we're currently growing, we're currently working on. So it doesn't have as many features. So I'm going to show you our international side of things really quick here. The setup for international is pretty similar. You have your client builder where you're passing in your credentials. Because if you have one account that has multiple subscriptions, you can use those same credentials for those different SDK calls or those different API calls with
Great.
the SDK. You specify again what license you're using. So I'm using our international autocomplete v2 cloud license. And then you specify that you're building the international address autocomplete client. And then we have our lookup. So our international lookup works slightly different than our US lookup. First, when creating it, you'll notice I didn't add the address when we construct the lookup. We specify later where we're adding it as inside the search field. So our search parameter, we're setting it to the address that our customer is giving us. The next most important thing with international is you have to specify what country that lookup is coming from. You cannot leave this blank. You will get an error in response. You have to specify, hey, I want to look up in this country, and it's by the country field. So here we have our Alpha 3 country code for Canada specified. So we are only going to get in return Canada addresses. So if I go back to my website here, I scroll down a little bit, I have our little international. You'll notice too that my results filter are a little smaller. We don't return as many results because international addresses are awesome. They vary drastically according to where you are. So I'm just going to show you the really simplified version of how to use autocomplete with Canada right now. So if I start typing information in, you'll see it functions similar. My website functions similar to the way that the US Street one does, where we have our Canada addresses here listed. And then when I select it, it just gives us that street information for that Canada address. So going back to our lookups here, the Canada address is specified, and then when you send the result in, when you send the lookup in, it'll give you again that list of results. I can show you. Let's see. So you'll see here that after I send it, I have this result that's being returned. And then inside of the results that I got from sending it, there's a result field that contains those lists. It's the same as the US Street side of things, or the US Autocomplete side of things, or again, getting the results back as a result field that contains those results. International. Now let's go into their filtering a little bit. Again, we do have the results that you're receiving, those options that they're going to get back. Again, if it's not set, the default is 10, and you can set it between a good clarification is you have a range of 1 to 10. 10 is the max, 1 is the minimum. And so you can specify how many results am I returning. And again, you'll notice that it's not always going to give them 10 results. It gives them up to 10 results that are good for their use case. So as they type in more and more information into it, the amount of information will reduce according to how close that address matches to whatever results they get. Same with our US product.
Awesome.
And then the last one is just, we do have filtering. We do have include only in our international. So you can include only with locality. So that's similar to city state, where you can specify the whatever city they're in, and then whatever their city, town, or village. And then they also include the what is that called outside of the US? Their locality, the Ontario or
Province.
Thank you, province. So yeah, and then you can also specify by postal code. So Canada has postal codes, so you can also specify by postal code. And it works the same as the US product. Looks like we have.
Yeah. So what about apartments? With the API, sometimes we'll say, there's 20 entries here. How do we know?
Yeah.
Is there a way to fine tune that?
That is a really good question. There is a way to fine tune that. I don't have that shown here. Is a little bit more complex in the fine tuning of it, but I can show you kind of what fields you would set. So going back to the US product, with fine tuning your result here, let's say your customer selects an address that is an apartment. In the result option, it'll specify how many sub addresses or apartments are underneath that. Same with international. International will also specify how many entries are in that address. And so all you need to do is when a customer selects a lookup, so I'm just going to add it here. Let's say we'll take results, take the first result in that list, and then we're going to take that results information. So we are going to you'll collect again the information of that address, and then when you send a new lookup, so we'll just take the street for now, street line, and then we will send a new lookup. So this new lookup will have will specify. So I won't show the full creation. I'll just show the option here. So it's called selected. So the selected field allows us to specify that we want all of the entries underneath this selected option. And so you'll have in your, show the quick. So you'll have your search category, which is whatever address you're using. And then you'll have your selected. And when they sent the result in the first time, they'll probably get a response that shows that there was entries. And so when we specify, hey, I want to show those entries, you'll say, okay, how many entries were there? There was probably 8 entries. And then you will return this lookup in this form. So you'll have to do a little bit of coding here where you grab what the user gave you and you use the entries number that was returned and the search category that was returned, and then send another lookup specifying that you want that selected lookup. And it'll look similar like this. Our documentation is awesome in showing how to do this. And then you'll receive a new options list, a new result of all of those secondaries.
Sure.
So,
That's great. Can we try an address? Is that okay?
with secondaries? Or just?
Yes, I've got an address with secondaries, but I want to ask about a specific address on our US autocomplete. So if you could put in without any state requirements, 3372 West, 1910 North. Okay, so this has a ton of units on it.
Mm-hmm. So you'll notice in my code currently right now, I chose not to show secondaries.
Mm-hmm.
But what we'll do is we'll look at this result. Just going to put this out to the console, and we'll just look at the results so that users can see kind of what we get here. Result. We're going to look at the 0. And then, Drew, what was that address again?
I don't know. Just kidding. It was 3372 West, 1910 North.
Refresh the page. All right, it's 3272 West.
1910 North.
Okay. So here is our.
And it does show that there are units. So it's even saying like this needs to have a unit.
There it is right there. Okay. So I don't know if you guys can see that.
We can. It is relatively small, but we can see it.
It is tiny. So this field here, it's specifying, hey, there are 10 entries that are underneath this address here.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we can do is you can take this entries field and you can add it to the address in order to get the filtered responses. Now you'll notice it didn't return any of the secondaries. You have to recall the API in order to get those responses.
The secondary options.
Right.
Here's one last question. We're well out of time. But I'll ask this one last question. So this address has a bunch of units, but this address has multiple buildings at it with unit A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and each of those letters represents a building, and then there's an actual unit number afterwards. So it says like A101, A102, A303, or whatever. And it's brand new, so it isn't fully in there. Can a user say, yes, this is my address, and then manually add their unit and have it still go through and have it still work, even though it's not in the autocomplete database because it's a brand new building and the USPS hasn't updated yet?
So your question is, can they use autocomplete to
get the majority of it, and then they'll add their own unit afterwards?
You definitely, that's a use case. You could type in the address, it's this specific location. It's also got secondaries. You can get all the way to as far as you need. And then if you know what your secondary number is, you can then use that.
Okay. Because that's one of the most frustrating things that I've experienced. This isn't my address. This is just one I happen to know is being built. When I come to a website that has autocomplete, and I don't know if they're using our autocomplete, Google's autocomplete, whoever, and I can find something close to my address, but the unit is off.
Now,
And I'm trying to click it, but they or manually type it, but they only accept what's in there in the autocomplete.
Now there are some caveats to that, like our Autocomplete Pro, our Autocomplete APIs won't return a response. If the address doesn't exist, the autocomplete won't actually give you anything back once you fully typed it out. So it'll stop at that point where it's like, oh, I gave you up to the example here, it shows the unit. It'll stop at that point. And then if you add any other information, you won't get another response from us. It'll give you a blank result. So it would be on the creator of the website to say, hey, they gave me a secondary number or letter or whatever. And I'm going to accept that they know what they're doing, and I'm going to accept that result. Another option that's really cool is you can use our other products in tandem with our autocomplete.
Oh, yeah.
So our autocomplete is really cool because it gives you the ability to get an address, get a valid address, but it doesn't give you any information about that address. That's what our US Street API product's all about. Our US Street allows you to get, is this a valid address? Does the secondary information exist? And it can give you more information. So you can actually use these two products in tandem, where you can then take this result and send it to the US Street API and then get, a ton more information on this address. That you as the developer can use.
I mean, we're always releasing new products. You can even get US property data on each one. You can find out what kind of roof that building has. You can.
Autocomplete's a really good front tool that's really easy to use. And using our other tools that we have, you just expand what your use case is for and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. I have one more slide. If you can show my slide, I do want to talk a little bit about this. I'm assuming that the majority of you are here because in some way you've played with autocomplete and you're trying to make sure it gets smoother. If you haven't already, you can get a free trial that comes with 1,000 lookups, and you can use those 1,000 lookups while you're testing with your autocomplete API. When you get a free account, you can also just ask if you need more testing lookups. We're happy to connect you. You just have to, on the Smarty website in the bottom right corner, there's a little chat bubble. You can chat into support. They can help you, or you can email our sales team, sales@smarty.com, and just let them know, hey, I'm looking for more testing lookups, and they can hook you up. But if you don't have an account yet, or you haven't got a free trial, this is how you do it. Smarty.com/signup, or Smarty.com, and in the top corner, there's a get a free account. We're out of time. Thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you, Andrew, for your time. This has been very useful and interesting, and we hope you guys got out of it what you're hoping to, and that you'll join us in future webinars. Have a great day.